Welcome to Digital Mental Health Musings, a podcast series from the eMental Health in Practice initiative, providing health practitioners with the latest news and developments in digital mental health services and resources. MPRAC acknowledges the Turrbal and Yagara people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we bring you this conversation. We acknowledge elders past and present and honour their continuing connection to land, culture and community, and that it's these connections that are intertwined in Indigenous mental health and social and emotional well-being. We acknowledge the strength and resilience of all First Nations people and communities since colonisation of their unceded lands. Hello and welcome to a brand new season of Digital Mental Health Musings. I'm your host, Dr Tanya McMahon, and I'm delighted to be back with you. If you're new here, a big welcome to the community. This is a podcast that explores the research, practitioners and stories behind the latest evidence-based digital mental health resources developed here in Australia. Our aim is to really highlight and discuss the key issues surrounding digital mental health so that we can safely navigate the digital space with our clients and within our own practice. We've been working on some exciting new content for you this year. We'll be delving into the fascinating research behind the psychology of adopting digital mental health. We'll look at what it means to trust a new technology, what builds trust and distrust, and we'll also speak to experts about the implementation and translational research, helping clinicians bridge the gap between evidence and best practice. We'll unpack some of the big issues that the widespread use of digital brings to the field of mental health. How does digital mental health challenge our professional identity? What kinds of attitudes and behaviours drive clinical change when it comes to technology? And we'll also look at why adapting to change can be inherently difficult and how to overcome those barriers. This season, we're also bringing you a new segment called On the Ground. In these episodes, we'll hear from clinicians who have started to integrate digital mental health into their practice. And in our first episode, I'm delighted to be joined by psychologist Dr Lyn O'Grady. Lyn spent decades working, researching and presenting on better mental health for children, young people and families. She's worked with parents in the community sector as a school psychologist and as a manager of the Kids Matter project for the Australian Psychological Society. More recently, Lyn has developed a particular interest in suicide prevention. She has a master in suicidology and conducts workshops and training in this area for mental health professionals. And she's also the author of a book for parents of teenagers who are suicidal called Keeping Our Kids Alive, Parenting a Suicidal Young Person. So on to our first episode and to hear Lyn's insights and experiences. Enjoy. Welcome to the show, Lyn. It's an honour to have you join us today.
Thank you, Tanya. I'm really happy to be here. It's going to be an interesting conversation, I think.
Certainly. And Lyn, you've worked across such an interesting range of settings in child and adolescent mental health. Can you start by just telling us a little bit about your journey through this field and where you are now and the type of practice you're involved in, the type of clients you typically work with?
Yeah, sure. Well, it goes back to the 90s, actually, when I was working with parents in the community. So in the community sector, I was working with parents in parenting groups and running groups and support groups and that kind of work. And then spent some time, and I was studying psychology at that time. So it was before I was registered as a psychologist. And then during the 2000s, I moved into school work. So doing some work initially with kids at risk who are not attending school, and then moving into working with a number of schools in wellbeing, sort of proactive kind of roles, and then ended up in the more traditional school psychologist role for a few years as well. And then from 2010 on, I spent a decade. So I sort of had these decades that my work is broken down into. So in 2010, I moved into more system work. So working with the Australian Psychological Society. So managing some projects, the Kids Matter project was what it was called at the time, and did that work and some other projects that the APS were involved in, and often with government, Commonwealth Department of Health kind of projects. So I did that work. And then just before COVID hit, which was probably not the best timing if you kind of knew it was coming, which we didn't really, at the time I decided that I wanted to get a bit closer to the ground again. I felt like I was sort of moving away from the real kind of world. So I decided that I wanted to do something a bit closer to the ground. So I moved into private practice. So that's where I've continued to be. and worked through COVID, continuing to do quite a bit of face-to-face work with people with masks and all those kinds of things on, and working with children and adolescents as well as adults as well. So I have a bit of a mix now, and continuing to do that work now and supervise psychology interns, do some consultation, do some training, and quite a bit of a mix of things in my week, which I really enjoy. That variety is really good, and they fit together, but they're quite different areas of work. So that's what we're doing the
Wow,
last
so
4 years.
you really had quite a wide breadth of experience across the sector with treatment, intervention, prevention, and then working in that
Yeah,
that kind of system space as well. That's
yeah.
really fascinating. And what for you in your work would you say was the catalyst or the turning point in terms of adopting digital mental health tools and products and that kind of thing, services into your workflow? Was there a particular product or service that piqued your interest to start with, or were clients perhaps coming to you with tools they'd already been accessing? When did you start looking into digital mental health as something of
Yeah.
interest?
Yeah, I think when I was working at the APS and part of different conversations at that government level, I remember a lot of talk about digital mental health and that being an option for people. So recognizing the wide range of needs that people, children, young people and adults have around accessing support, and the lack of ability, I guess, to get the support that they need all the time or quickly. So there was a lot of talk at that time around the digital mental health space, and the work that Black Dog was sort of leading as well, and research that they were doing to really talk about quality and really understanding what was there, because there's lots and lots of variety of it, but and then some concerns around, well, where's the evidence base for this? So I was involved with some of those conversations at that kind of level. So I was very aware of it and very conscious of it, and then starting to use some of them myself, I suppose. So starting to download some of them for myself, the Calm app and Insight Timer, and just different relaxation type things, meditation type things for myself, my own use. So I started to do that. So then, of course, when I got into private practice work, children would come in and be looking for technology. They'd be looking for iPads and things. And I'd say, I don't have iPads. And no, don't want you touching my computer. We've got a farm set, or we've got some blocks, we've got some paper. And so I was sort of going back to the old school, and I really noticed lots of change in that decade that I'd been away from doing that work, that technology was a big part of children's life and adolescence, and kind of really conscious of that, but then not wanting to go down a path that I got kids in and just playing games on the computer. I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to be purposeful, and I wanted to be connected to the work that we're doing. So that was kind of a sort of a challenge to then work out, well, how do I make this work? How do I then use what's got a good evidence base behind it? And that's why the HPRAC is really useful as a resource, so that I can feel confident with that. So that was sort of one of the things I started to look at, and then printing out the guide, giving it to people as options was one of the things I started to do straight away, and then testing how that went. And I guess that's what we can talk about in terms of some of those learnings, and then thinking about, well, how do I incorporate it into my work, and is it actually helpful? Is it distracting? So trying to manage all of that was kind of where I went. And often they'd heard of things like Smiley Mind. So Smiley Mind was often used in schools. So Smiley Mind was probably the main one that they would be able to talk about. If I talked about relaxation, they would sometimes say, oh, is that like Smiley Mind? So that was probably the main one, I think, that they would bring. And again, there's a variety around that. Some kids were very familiar with it, and others hadn't really used it at all, kind of knew about it, but not much.
So that's really interesting. It sounds like quite not a quick journey, not an overnight, like I've heard about these things and tomorrow I'm going to go use them. Great.
Yeah,
It sounded like a
yeah.
real evolution, didn't it?
Yes.
Where you were hearing about the need to start with, that there's obviously a huge problem out there. There's people not getting access to care, and there's these options becoming more and more available as something else to access. So it sounds like that was kind of the groundwork for you, that there's these options out there to solve a very real
Yes.
problem. And then you had this kind of married together with then the needs of the individuals you were seeing, these young kids and adolescents coming in who are already digital natives, who are already really comfortable with technology and well versed in it, coming in wanting that because that's what they're comfortable with. They
Yeah,
don't want a
that is
worksheet
true.
or or a
Yeah,
workbook or
that's right.
whatever, the
Yeah.
stuff that we were trained on. And then, so it sounds like you had, those two things kind of coming together, and then that really, it sounds like, motivated you to then actively look for, well, what could I be offering them? And it sounds like already there were ones they were familiar with, that they were mentioning Smiling Minds, a big one, some of those really well-known ones. But it sounds like you were also treading into that space yourself, looking for apps that
Yes. Yeah.
worked for
Yeah.
you, and that's what a
Yeah.
lot of us have been doing, an app that helps with whether it's mood tracking or whatever. We're starting to look for that ourselves. So having that personal experience of, I guess, success, or it working, or it being helpful, all coming together to a point where then it sounds like you're really then looking for ways to integrate it really effectively into your work. And that's where you mentioned looking for, well, part of the work we do, offering, a directory of resources and things like that, to really go, well, how do I go from just offering this one app that I've heard of to making a really tailored choice? That's a really interesting journey. And I'm really interested to know, in your work, what kinds of products have you ended up, using, and how do you use them? Can you talk us through any
Yeah.
specific
Yeah.
cases or examples there?
Yeah, so I think the Sleep Ninja is a more recent one from Black Dog, which I've used, which is specific, obviously, to sleep. And sleep is a pretty big issue across across the board, I think, and something we're recognizing is pretty important. You can't really think about mental health without thinking about sleep. So I've had some success with that. I'm thinking about one teenage boy in particular that I would only ever see on Zoom, and he was quite keen to kind of do what I suggested. So he was always someone who would take away, sort of expectations from the session of what he would do. And if it was talk to mum about something, or go away and try something, or deal with something differently, he would always do that and report back. So he was fairly serious about what we were doing. And so he was quite a good person to use the Sleep Ninja with. So it was something that he did use, he did find it interesting. He didn't solve all of his sleep problems. He would still have some difficulties with sleep, and being a teenager, doing, sort of trying to manage his time and turning off his devices and things at night time sometimes got in the way of that, or just sometimes some worries that he would have would get in the way. But at least it gave him something quite concrete that he could use and refer to and take responsibility for. So it was almost like he knew from that and the conversations we'd had over period of time around sleep hygiene and what he could do to kind of help himself. It gave him something extra. So I think that was something that added some weight to what I was talking about. And also, in a session, you're trying to cover so many things quite often in that 50-minute session, that to give that sort of idea to go away and look at that, to consolidate some of that, or to get a bit more information, or to look at it in a different way, because you don't quite know what people do take away from the conversations that you're having. So that was a pretty successful one. But partly his approach to the sessions and how he just approached what
So
adults told him to do that
you
made it
could tell from
think.
the outset that he was going to be really on board
Yes.
with
Yeah.
the suggestion of
Yeah.
something. For our listeners who aren't as familiar with Sleep Ninja, can you briefly just describe what it does?
Yeah, so it has a CBT approach to, so it's through Black Dog Institute. So again, that idea that it's a well researched, it was quite new, but it had been researched before it had been released. So that's that kind of evidence based part that I always have in the back of my mind, or probably closer to the front. Really, I'm always thinking about that. And so it has CBT, so it has that kind of awareness raising, and then it has these explanations around how things work, and then a way of sort of strategies and approaches to manage sleep better, and then to track it a little bit as well in terms of how your sleep's going. So it's a very structured kind of approach to it, with that psychoeducation aspect to it as well. So, and I looked at it myself as well, so I had a bit of a look at it, and was sort of aware of what was there, so that I felt confident I could explain what it was as well, and confident that the timing was right, because he tried a few things with sleep. We talked about it a fair bit, and then here's his app that I found out. So I was able to be a bit enthusiastic about it, and thinking it's probably, really good time now to try it. That we'd sort of, I didn't start with it because I kind of worry that if you just give an app to start with too soon, that might be a bit dismissive, that we've got some work we could do first. So I felt the timing was quite good, that he tried a few things, or we'd sort of been working on it. So we needed something to boost that. We'll say he needed something extra. I felt, because what I'm saying is kind of not getting us, not creating the change. So it added to what I could do and gave him something to go away and look at between sessions as well.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? because we're often focusing on so many different aspects of a problem when we're working with someone. And if you don't have all the time in the world, sometimes it can feel like, well, we've mentioned this and I've tried raising it, and there's only so much traction we're getting in the session. And this sounds like a great example of where a tool has really come in and, like you said, added weight to what you've talked
Yeah.
about, backed up the kind of approach that you would be taking, and
Yeah.
then allow them to go away and kind of do it in their own time. And
Yeah.
it sounds like it really worked really well with this client.
Yeah, yeah. So that was a good one. And the other one that I've used quite a bit is Bite Back, which is again from Black Dog, and that has kind of activities. So it's around mood. It has different sort of topics. And there's one activity that I've used around friendships, and it's like a little quiz that you can sort of use. So I've used that in session with people as a way of sort of getting them sort of familiar with what it is. So I've just sat at my laptop and worked through that activity and giving them a bit of a feel for what's there, and then sort of showing them the other things. And I've had mixed success with that. So I was sort of thinking that doing it in the session so they're familiar with it, and then sending them the link so they've got it handy, or writing it down for them, might then engage them a little bit more. And I think for some people it did. They would use that and part of coping. So often nighttime again is a difficult time. And so having something maybe to kind of do before bed to kind of focus on was something, even though we say don't turn off your devices. But for some young people, it was sort of something they're ruminating and getting stressed, and maybe having, thoughts about self-harm or suicide with some of the clients I was working with at the time. So this was sort of an idea around maybe you could do a bit of that as part of that bedtime routine, as a way of getting your brain into some of this more positive, helpful stuff that might be engaging. So that was kind of helpful for a period of time for some people. But then others, I would say, did you check it out? Did you remember to have a look? And they hadn't necessarily done that. So even though we'd done it in the session, which I felt was setting them up to get familiar with it and have something to take away, but it didn't always mean that they would go away and do it. So I guess there's this individual choice and individual, kind of priorities that people have. But that seemed like that was a useful way. At least I felt I was doing it in a solid way. I wasn't just suggesting a website. I was kind of getting them to have a bit of a look at it and try it out first and use it in some way to get a feel of it. So that had mixed results, really.
Yeah, so you gave it a good crack, really. So you really viewed your role as, I'm going to try and socialize them to this tool, and not just say,
Yes,
oh, there's
yes,
this really good website, you should check it out, here's the link.
yeah, yeah,
Actually build in a point to it. Like, we're going to be, there's some really
yeah,
helpful, this kind of activity on there, and this will help,
yeah.
your rationale. And it sounds like, much like we experience in just our face-to-face interventions, things don't always land.
Yes,
Things
that's
don't always
right.
work. And,
Yeah,
that's,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
And I may have needed to be a bit more prescriptive with some of them. Maybe I needed to say, go away and try this activity. Like, if I sort of think back to some of them that may have still been too broad, we've done this activity, now you go away and look at it more broadly. Maybe if I'd said, let's choose one that you can do at home, that might have been a better way and made it a little bit clearer. So a bit more scaffolding around it, maybe, because I'm thinking it's good to look around all the different activities they've had, but maybe they needed something that needed a bit more support than that. So I think it's this ongoing kind of reflection that I continue to do, I think, in my work. And even yesterday, I was getting a bit stuck with an 11-year-old girl, and we were sort of not feeling like we're making much headway. She likes to play games, card games and things in session, but she doesn't want to talk very much at all. And my questions just kind of annoy her. And so I was sort of saying, do we want to continue and put the dad in? What are we going to do? How do we move forward? And I'd done some outcome measurements with her and compared to previously. And some things are increasing, some concerns are increasing rather than decreasing. So I was feeling stuck, and I said, I don't feel like the sessions are that helpful, but I don't feel like we can kind of close with these increasing outcome measures. So I felt like, I need to still keep something happening here, but it wasn't serious enough to refer off to escalate to somewhere. So I ended up kind of coming up with the idea that we needed a bit more structure to our sessions. And because anxiety was coming up as really high, that perhaps together we could do the BRAVE program. So BRAVE program is an online program that often I would suggest people do it with parents and do it at home. But I ended up saying, what if we make our sessions more structured? Even for the most part of it, we can have a game still, but that we actually work our way through this program, and we make our sessions fortnightly to try and build in that structure, and then I give you some homework in between times, and you come back, we keep working our way through it, and then share that with the parents. So that was kind of, it was when I was getting stuck. This was just yesterday, and I was getting stuck going, what do I do?
Yeah.
I couldn't kind of close, but I couldn't keep doing what I was doing. And so
Mm.
then I just, the Brave program came to mind when the anxiety is reaching out. So she's obviously got this internalizing anxiety that's going on, and kind of not wanting to talk about it, not knowing how to talk about it, and not making my things with her weren't landing and just annoying her, really. So I'm hoping that this Brave program will give us a connecting point with a bit of a focus and structure that will maybe help us work through and help her understand what's going on for herself in a way that she wasn't connecting with before. So
Yes, isn't that interesting? It's given you another option, hasn't it?
yeah,
Yeah, and
I think
and for
so.
anyone who's not familiar with Brave, it's a full course of treatment essentially. There's quite a few services out there that offer a full course of treatment, the kind of CBT based treatment you would get in face-to-face care, and they can be standalone. So someone could go away and do it completely on their own or with the guidance of a parent. But it's great that it's given you a different. In a situation where many of us might consider discharging or referring on because you're kind of getting stuck, you've run out of options. It's given you something else to try that actually might
Yeah,
suit her, or at least change things up, at least,
yeah.
get some movement happening.
Yeah, because I think we're both starting to get frustrated. But she didn't want to. She also, I said, you don't want to come back, that's fine. I can talk to Dad about that. But then she wasn't saying no. And that was the other thing. It's like she's seeing that there's a need, but I'm just not hitting the mark. I'm just not meeting her where she's at, and we just need to do something different. So, well, yeah, so this will give us a structure, and we've got sort of laid out 4 fortnightly sessions as a structured thing, and we'll review it after and see how that goes after that. So I feel like I've got something to be a bit more direction with her, but hopefully engaging and interesting, and kind of picks up on where she's at, she needs. But yeah, I would have, otherwise it would have been, I wouldn't have wanted to discharge, but I wouldn't have wanted to continue doing what I was doing, because I'd like to actually have a focus when the need is obvious, but to have a focus on it and not just play games and try to invite conversation just
Yes.
wasn't really.
Not just trying doing the same, the same
Yeah,
things
yeah,
over and over again.
that's right.
And it's the other interesting thing about that is it's not it seems that you're using the tools in different ways and at different stages along the
Yeah,
journey. It's not as though, okay, I use digital tools, I introduce them all in the first session because that's what I do, and I sign people up. You're really using your clinical expertise and your judgment to figure out how and when these tools will be the most effective, when seems to be the right time to introduce them into the therapy journey, if at all.
yeah, that's right. And there might be times when it's not appropriate. And I think about younger children where parents are not that receptive towards it, and I certainly have children coming in, wanting to use technology, but I also would have some children that I work with whose parents are not keen on technology and wouldn't really be open to that. So then it's a decision around what is the conversation with parents to say this could be useful and could be something that's a benefit for you to look at. But then if the parents are not really open to it, then there's a point that that's probably not going to work. So again, it's the engagement level as we all work with children, where are the parents at, and what support to get from parents. So introducing it as an idea. But I did have a new client that I haven't started working with yet. There was a bit of a waiting period that I've set up a session in a few weeks, and they were quite keen around anxiety, quite keen to do something. So I did suggest the Brave program for them to have a look at as parents, to see what they thought about that in this period of time, a couple of weeks before I actually meet with the child, and to have a look at that, to get a bit of a feel for it. And they were quite keen, because they were quite keen to do something and to on it. Then
Just get started. Yeah.
yeah, so I'll see how that goes. That'll be another kind of thing when I felt these, and it was just a phone call to make a time, but both parents came online and very, very keen to get going. So that felt like that was a good time to make that suggestion as an option, and they were both very keen to do that. So it's really, I guess it's like all our work. We're tuning into where people are at. I've always got there. I know what I'm confident with. I'm continuing to learn. I often Black Dog have some webinars, some brief kind of webinars about this kind of thing that I often try and join, or read their research updates, get their newsletter and get their research updates about new apps and things that are coming out or where it's up to. So I'm trusting the sources is really important, and knowing what the programs are, what the apps, what's involved in them, I think is part of it. So I just build that into my it's not even formal professional development. It's just it's just organic really that I'm interested in. I find it coming to me and I go, that will be useful. So it's always there, stored back of mind, bring it out when it feels useful to do it as another resource, just as I might have in the past, book or handouts or something. It's I kind of see it in that way, that sometimes there might be a book that I suggest, or there might be some handouts or sort of information that I would suggest. I see it in that same way, that it's just
Yeah.
part of how I work with people.
Yeah, and yeah, Black Dog do have a great kind of library or repository of support and information. They've got the Health Professional Resource and Education Hub, which has a lot of access to general mental health stuff, but also how to integrate digital into practice. And you raised something really interesting before they wanted to go back to about the different rules that families have. You raised a really interesting point about some parents perhaps being hesitant or reluctant to introduce technology into the treatment space. And obviously, different families will have different rules around screens. It's a huge issue and topic at the moment, and also different capacities for overseeing how their kids use digital tools at home. How do you factor those kinds of discussions into how you prescribe? Like, do you educate the entire family? Like, how do you kind of have that conversation?
Yeah, look, I think if there was something like the Brave program that's really useful, then I would probably work with the parent a bit more about that and try to explain to them how it works and what's involved with it. But I guess if they're not sort of engaged and interested, then they're probably less likely to do that. So I wouldn't want to then just rely on that. I'd want to then go back to my normal ways of working. And I guess a lot of the apps for children or programs for children do need adult support. So it's a bit different to adolescents. So I feel like with adolescents, I've got a bit more leeway that they've got their phones or they've got their own access, that they can make their own decisions, and less need for parents to agree or be part of that. Whereas with children, you really need the parents on board. So I guess I gauge where they're at, and if they're interested and motivated, then I'll talk to them about it. If they're really not, that's not going to hit the mark for them, well, then I'll let that go and go back to my normal kind of ways of working, I suppose. But flagging it, I think, is important so that they can see. And I guess there's a bigger conversation around where technology fits and the pros and cons of technology, and that, it's not all bad, that it can be part of life now, that
Yes.
we need to kind of embrace and work with kids around. So here's one avenue of where it has been shown to be positive. But really, apart from the Brave program and Smiling Mind, there's probably not a lot that are tailored just to younger children as well. And that makes sense. I mean, I'm sure there are apps there, but not ones that I'd be recommending for children. So I guess there's not as many. So it probably isn't such a priority for me as it is as adolescents in particular, or adults as well. So
But
so
it's
I think it's probably
definitely, it's an interesting conversation to be able to have with parents too, because I like to think of it a lot as like the conversation around food. Not all, there's plenty of food out there that's
Yes.
nutritious and helpful.
Yeah.
Then there's junk food, which we want to limit, and some people view screens and screen time for kids and adolescents as a sea of all bad, and that there is some not great stuff on there that they have to be mindful of. But I think it's a great way to have the discussion that there is some really helpful stuff that screens can do for us and technology can do for us, and this is one of them. And if it's used in this prescribed way, definitely.
The benefits are there.
Yeah. The other question I had around, issues with technology is obviously, as many of us have probably experienced when we've used something new for the first, few times, you get teething problems cropping up, usually at the most inconvenient of times. Have you had things go wrong? And if you have, do you have any advice around how we can turn that experience around?
Yeah, look, I've had apps sometimes where I've had enthusiasm, but then the app hasn't necessarily done what we expected it to do. So whether it's been not working or whether it was quite new and didn't sort of live up to what I had hoped for. So there was one in particular that perhaps won't say the name of it, but it was a new one, and it sort of was about mood and tracking mood. So I expected that it was going to have a, kind of a record of that. So I was sort of suggesting that this young person could go away and track the mood every day, and then we could come back and talk about it. And it didn't actually do that tracking. So it was a pretty disappointing experience. And she was very keen and she did do it. But then when she came back to me, she said, well, I thought I could show you, but it's not actually showing that. So I still don't know if it was a malfunctioning of it or whether it was a feature that I expected was there, but wasn't actually there. So yeah, so that's one I still need to kind of investigate that and see where that went wrong. But it really was very deflating that she'd put in the effort and then went to show me, and then it wasn't having that feature available for us on that day. So that was a bit of a disappointment, I suppose. And I know that there's all the work that's gone into apps and looking at what makes them engaging and what makes people, look at them, the part of the quality control stuff, but also you want people to be able to keep using them and be engaged and be motivated to use them. So I guess that experience then was pretty deflating, which might then have impacted on her continuing to use it, even though she said it was kind of useful at the time. She found it okay. But because she didn't have that record at the end, it made it less relevant, less useful for us, because I then had to sort of to track to things that she remembered, which was not really the point of the app. Then we could have just used paper, like we
Yes.
might have done in the past. So that kind of made me a bit reluctant then to kind of use that app again until I get to kind of check it out and see how that was working, so that I'm sure about what I'm suggesting it can do. But I think for that young person, it was probably a really unhelpful experience, that she sort of was motivated and then didn't get the outcome that she was hoping for as well, that we were both expecting. So
And
that's been a tricky.
it does feel then like the takeaway is to really dive in and have a look at the apps and
Yeah,
things yourself and
yeah,
go through them. Because I've had similar experiences where I have recommended apps and things that I've, had vouched for by other colleagues, or I've, read, I've done, maybe a quick dive in to have a look and gone, yep, that looks good. And then recommended them, and then had someone come back and say, oh, that, that bit there wasn't there, or which, like some kind of question. And then once you've gone and had an actual deep dive, realizing like, oh, this doesn't actually do that, or it only goes so far. So it really, to have that absolute confidence in an app, or a tool or a service, you're going through and checking it out yourself. It sounds
yeah. I
like
think
that's what
that's
you
really
kind of
important.
went back and did.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I still need to look at it and check what I go back through it, because I guess when you're looking at the apps, you get to a certain point and then you're not necessarily using it the whole way through as well. When you're just doing it to find out about it, you're getting what information you can glean. So it's probably easy to make assumptions around what it would actually provide, but it may not. So I think, I still need to check that one out and find out a little bit more about that. And it could have been a glitch. I mean, we talk about technology where there can be glitches and things can go wrong, and that's why they get updated all the time, because glitches happen, and or they add new features over time as well. So it may have been quite early, because I knew it was an early one. So it may have been that it hadn't been completely finalized, or that they were still completing some of those features. So
And that's quite a common thing to happen too, is that in this space, it's a really rapidly evolving space, and we're noticing tools and products that are, were available yesterday, and then the platform's no longer supported, a few months later because of funding or things like that. And so even some of our go-to recommendations might have been updated since we last recommended them, or might be, under construction as they update the platform or whatever. So yeah, it's quite a common occurrence for those glitches to happen and things not to work the way that we necessarily expect. Has using digital tools, on the flip side, introduced any surprising benefits that you hadn't anticipated, or other challenges that
yeah,
surprised you?
I think just the level of interest that people have is probably quite a surprising thing. Like, for some people, that it really, how they really take it on, and it really is a useful thing for them, I think is kind of something that I wouldn't have necessarily thought just how beneficial it could be for some people. But then the flip side of that is when I've kind of thought that it would be useful, and then people don't engage with it, and that challenge. But that, it's very similar to other work that we do, and that, where things land, or what works for some people doesn't work for others. But I think about, my own use of, Insight Timer or Calm for my own stuff, just how engaging it can be, and how useful it can be, and how they're sort of evolving and becoming more sophisticated, and the uses of the different mechanisms within them, that, for sleep or for meditation during the day or different times of the day. So the content is really very valuable, and I think growing all the time. So the opportunities that are there, and the sort of ways that you can use them is really useful, even relevant personally, I think. So there's that personal use and trying to kind of get benefits for myself as well, and then being able to pass that on to people. But I think there's certainly opportunities that perhaps are untapped as well, that we could be maybe, continuing to use them and keep engaging with them and finding out more about them, and then using them more and more to get more of those benefits that perhaps, we sort of aren't really all to date with yet, or building into the way that we work. There's some more opportunity, I think, to do that.
Yes, yes, those kind of untapped benefits. And I think you raise a really good point there, that despite there being, a wealth of evidence out there, a lot of clinicians still doubt, is this really going to help? I could go through this, myself, or we just do it the way that I've done it. And, is this really going to add extra? And it can be really surprising sometimes just what capabilities are unlocked with transferring some of these, skills and activities and things into this digital format, that it's a really great way to deliver a lot of the stuff that we do. And yeah, sometimes it just takes having a go to learn that and go, oh wow, this works really, really well. And it's not just, say, the treatment programs or apps and things, it's also using digital online spaces as a source of, say, peer connection for people as well. I think a lot of people are drawn online because the world is there, the online world is there, and there's some really amazing, safe kind of digital spaces for people to connect with others going through similar things. And yeah, I think when we start to hear those experiences from our clients, and like you said, when we have them ourselves as clinicians, in our own
Yeah.
lives, and realize how well it can work, it is a really big motivator for wanting to then use that on the regular, in our work.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think reach out, the parent forums, the parent reach out part of that program, I think, is a really useful one for parents. So parents who are struggling with, day-to-day concerns with kids, I think that's a different type of kind of way of connecting. And again, it's a forum style online forum. Headspace have some similar things as well, and for young people to engage as well. So I think, yeah, that being with others. And I think Kids Helpline have a whole lot as well, I found out about recently. So I think there's a lot of, again, more out there than what we realize. And it's not necessarily the more passive app where you're gathering information or going through it, but that connection with others as well, I think is perhaps untapped in terms of that online networking and trusting that forum. I guess Beyond Blue forums are the other kind of avenue for that as well, that are there. But we could be probably promoting those as well as kind of between session support that people can access from peers and other people going through the similar things.
Yes. And I think that's the thing, is because the space really is evolving so rapidly. It's hard to keep on top of it, but it does mean that our ideas about it need to kind of catch up, because I think a lot of people do think, oh, well, digital, it's probably just like a mood tracking app, like, because that's where we started when digital started emerging, was, those simple functions. And that's, it's great, some of those apps that do those simple things, but now it's really increased in sophistication, some of the things that these platforms and tools and things can do. So it's really worthwhile, having a look and seeing what's new and what can it do, and then, obviously finding a way to integrate into our work, because the digital world really can unlock a lot of benefits for the people we work with. And as we draw to a close, would you have any tips or advice, from your experiences, tips or advice to clinicians who are brand new to digital mental health? Obviously, you've had quite a long journey to where you are now, but any clinicians who might be at the start of that journey, any advice for them?
Yeah, I think testing out, getting to know and be comfortable is really important. And then you can authentically say, this is a useful app or program that I'm familiar with. I think that makes it very real, and it's going to come across in a way that people can trust you more, and you can trust what you're saying too. So I think finding out about it, trying them out, looking at what's available is really important, and seeing it as a valuable part of kind of where we're heading, really. And I know there's real government push to try and make things accessible to people and give people choices and opportunities to engage in mental health support in various ways. So I think it fits with that, to complement what we might be doing, or closing with the client, to leave them with some things to continue the work themselves. So I think that's really important. But I think just to also recognise that it's one part of our work. We don't have to feel that it's going to be right for everyone. So trusting that judgment, that clinical judgment that we talked about around when's it useful, that, you know, we can help people make good decisions around what's useful, and explain to them the sorts of things, if they're going to be looking for the apps, what they can look out for as well. So that quality control aspect, or, you know, is it being developed by, just as you're looking at any information, really, who's the developer of it. The cost is also a factor, I think, as well, that sometimes there are apps that can be quite costly, and even the Calm app and Insight Timer, which Insight Timer's got a lot of free resources, but some of the really good stuff is actually you've got to pay. So, you know, that's a trap. So I'm always conscious of that if I'm sort of recommending apps. So I think, again, it's finding out, using them, and then not necessarily having to know everything about them, but having a good sense of what's out there and what's safe and been shown to be effective, so that you just doing that as you would any other work that you do in terms of making recommendations. So I think to feel confident that, and the IMPRAC resources help us to feel confident. So you don't have to do all of that groundwork. You can actually use resources to give you that guide that you can pass on to people, and guide them to where it might be most useful for them at this point in time, but set it up that there are resources there that they can keep finding as well.
Yes. Yeah. So it sounds like the main advice there being really authentic in your recommendations, not just, flippantly, oh, I heard about this website, having a look, being really confident, knowing what it's about and how it works, having that confidence to recommend really genuinely and authentically, and then using that clinical judgment like we do in any other context, or with recommending any other kind of intervention. And that's what we have, the National Digital Mental Health Standards, were released to help us with that accreditation to those standards for Australian digital mental health services will be that tick of approval that they've got the evidence behind them. They've been designed with people with lived experience, that kind of thing. And then familiarizing oneself with the directories, or the indexes of, well, what's out there that's low cost or free, that's got that evidence, because obviously it will take some time for lots of services to meet the standards. And that's, obviously the work we do here at IMPRAC, but Head to Health is another great hub of information. And for those working with First Nations clients, WellMob is a great website that navigates people to First Nations resources. So yeah, really, really great tips. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Lyn. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you and hearing your insights and your experiences.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. It's been interesting and ongoing work for me. So we could talk again and see what happens down the track, because it is just something to continue to learn about, I think, and be interested in. So thank you.
Yes, yeah, lots of the learning will be ongoing in this space, that's for certain.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lyn.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this conversation, please remember to search for Digital Mental Health Musings on your favourite podcast platform and subscribe to catch new episodes. And to find out more about digital mental health, or to access resources and digital mental health education, head to emprac.org.au.